What is the future of the church? How do we navigate a rapidly changing culture and discern a new way forward? Perhaps the answer lies in our past. As we look back, our memory can spark imagination for what's next. This, in fact, was the simple vision of John Wesley. Our movement began because Wesley believed that the story of God he encountered in the scriptures was not dead history, but a living reality. One spring night in 1738, on a London street called Aldersgate, John Wesley had a life-changing encounter with the Holy Spirit. He later described the moment in his journal. "I felt my heart strangely warmed." This would prove to be the spark of a worldwide movement. Wesley learned that the Holy Spirit is still active and alive and moving in dynamic power. He had the audacity to believe that the time for renewal is always right now. The accounts of the early church in the book of Acts captured his imagination. He preached and prayed to see the same kind of spiritual renewal, social reform, and cultural renaissance in his day. Do we have the faith to believe the same? For having the conviction to vocalize such faith in the unchanging nature of God, Mr. Wesley was rewarded by being banned from every local pulpit. He went from being a promising young Oxford fellow to an outcast, itinerant preacher. As he was forced out beyond the walls of the established and institutionalized church, the gospel started to take root in the culture around him, almost as if the thick of culture is the wild and native habitat of the kingdom. His greatest contribution was not in his analysis of theology, but his application of it where it matters most, in the real lives of real people. His theology created biography. For this, he is often called a folk theologian, meaning of the common people. The Wesleyan revival was on the move, and its distinctive pioneering spirit continued to drive it into new places. In 1771, America was on the verge of revolution. They were also on the edge of revival. That year, Francis Asbury landed on American soil. He was only 26 years old. When he arrived, there were 316 Methodists total, and only 9 preachers to lead them. He was what they called a circuit rider, carrying the gospel on horseback from outpost to outpost. He raised up a collective of circuit riding preachers, venturing into the frontier edges of the nation. They were pioneers who pushed the kingdom forward, planting new churches and gaining new ground out on the fringes of unreached places. Did it work? By the time of his death, the movement grew from 316 to more than 200,000, and from 9 preachers to over 4,000. And the pioneering ministry of Asbury helped sow the seeds of America's Second Great Awakening. If Wesley challenges us that the time for renewal is always now, Asbury shows that the place for renewal is always here.
As the movement flourished in the New World, they would soon face another defining moment and test of their calling. In the build-up to the American Civil War, a small remnant of pastors began to preach against the evil and sin of slavery. For their courage, they were forced out of their churches, much like their founder had been. Led by Orange Scott and Luther Lee, they formed the Wesleyan Methodist Connection in 1843 and became abolitionists and activists, with many of their churches serving as stations on the famed Underground Railroad. They published a manifesto in their anti-slavery paper aptly named The True Wesleyan. Orange Scott, who earned the nickname King of the Radicals, wrote, "We step into the breach. Duty is ours, consequences God's." Wesleyans were beaten and imprisoned, poisoned and hanged, murdered for the strength and courage of their love. Their lives were a protest against the way things were and a prophetic vision of the way they could be. And their cause prevailed. After their abolitionist vision was realized, they continued to fight against physical and spiritual slavery in all forms. These radicals worked for the rights of women and empowered their voices from the ballot box to the pulpit. The first Women's Rights Convention was held in Seneca Falls, New York, at the Wesleyan Methodist Chapel, and in 1853, founder Luther Lee ordained Miss Antoinette Brown, believed to be the first woman ordained to the Christian ministry in the modern era. We also responded to the Great Commission's call to make disciples of all nations. Courageous disciples followed Jesus into the mission field and found him already at work. As our eyes were opened to God's love for the whole world, we received an expanded vision of the kingdom, culturally rich and beautifully diverse. This pioneering spirit did not come without a cost. Many brave disciples risked their very lives for the cause of Jesus and the sake of the lost souls around the world. When setting off for the field, the first Wesleyan missionaries to Sierra Leone packed their belongings in their own coffins because they knew they were never turning back.
And yet, our history has not been all glory. As the American Civil Rights Movement organized behind a preacher and mobilized in local churches, our contribution is difficult to trace. Dr. King said, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." Through the turmoil, a faithful remnant raised their voices with prophetic courage and worked for the God-given rights of our brothers and sisters. Yet, as a church, we confess that we were mostly silent friends. We repented of that sin, and by God's grace, we vowed to never let it happen again.
1968 marked a fresh move of the Holy Spirit among us as the Wesleyan Methodist and Pilgrim Holiness churches united to form the Wesleyan Church. We continue to rediscover and reclaim our heritage as pioneers for the kingdom. We went to the margins of society and the ends of the earth. We labored for racial reconciliation and cultural diversity. We served small towns and large cities, and tens of thousands of children, teenagers, and college students have experienced the holy love and grace of Jesus. Who can measure the impact of countless faithful servants empowered by a faithful God?
And yet, God is not done. So neither are we. The time has come for the next Wesleyan movement, another Aldersgate, all over again. We need hearts on fire, consumed with holy love for God and our neighbor, and yes, even our enemies. We need a new generation of folk theologians who exemplify the gospel in the workplace, in the academy, in the thick of culture. Where are the new field preachers? How can we take the hope of Jesus beyond the established structures and out to the margins of society? There are many in our communities who will never step through the doors of our buildings. Will we step out of our doors and go to them? We need new freedom fighters. There are more slaves in the world today than at any other time in history. 27 million men, women, and children, victims of human trafficking, who need us to reclaim our heritage. History is repeating itself. Will we repeat our role in it? Where are the next circuit riders? The major cities, influential university towns, and cultural centers of this nation and beyond are becoming frontier places for the gospel all over again. We need the kingdom imagination to envision our unique opportunity for a new harvest. Will you go? The time for renewal is now. The place for renewal is here. Who will be our future pioneers?